Whenever a new form of media is created, controversy is sure to follow. From 1930 to 1968, the Motion Picture Production Code existed in order to keep violence, sex, and other similar topics out of films. TV shows must follow certain criteria if they want to remain on public broadcast, and radio is in a similar situation. The newest target of controversy and debate is video games, specifically whether or not video games can cause violent behavior. Both sides of the debate point to their own scientific studies and evidence, and without being familiar with the gaming community, it's easy to be swayed to one side or the other. This video will be looking at both sides of the argument in hopes of giving the clearest and most definitive answer to this debate using scientific data and analytics. After all that, I'll give my opinion on the topic as both a media creator and as part of the gaming community. To begin with, let's take a look at the arguments for video games causing violence. Now, you don't have to look for a long time to find arguments supporting the idea that video games cause violence. In fact, earlier this year, the President and the White House released a video that highlighted extremely violent moments in video games with the purpose of supporting the idea that video games cause violence. Looking at the issue from the outside, it is very easy to see how violent games promote violent behavior in real life. The realism in these games has gotten to a point where you'd be excused to think that a video game was actually a live-action film. So it stands to reason that the more realistic and graphic the violence in a video game is, and the more that game promotes violent behaviors, then the more violent the player will become. The American Psychological Association agrees with this assessment and, as CNN reports, observed that research demonstrated a link between violent video game use and both increases in aggressive behavior and decreases in pro-social behavior, empathy, and moral engagement. In that same article, CNN reports that in 2016, the American Academy of Pediatrics warned of violent media setting a poor example for kids. Many people on the other side of the debate like to state that most of the research supporting links between violent games and violence in real life is outdated, but as recently as October 1st, 2018, an international study found that kids from ages 9 to 19 who play violent games were more prone to violent behavior. This study lasted from 2010 to 2017 and consisted of 24 studies that were performed in countries such as the US, Canada, Germany, and Japan. Admittedly, the effect is small, only going as far as to create a link between violent video games and being sent to the principal's office rather than being more likely to commit crimes. However, the researchers still warn parents to watch out for their kids if they become more attracted to violent video games. They are unsure if it's the games that are warping the minds of the kids or if the kids' minds are already warped before pushing the start button. To add on to this, the World Health Organization has classified gaming disorder as a mental health condition. It's clear that the data is not outdated and that links can be reasonably made between violent games and violent behaviors. However, this isn't anything to write home about just yet. Looking at the arguments for video games not causing violence, the evidence is a mix of both scientific data and anecdotal proof. Going back to the idea that the more realistic the violence in a game, the more likely the player will become violent, a study from January 2018 directly refutes that claim, stating that these results contradict this perspective and instead suggests that realism may not lead to increases in aggression-related variables. In a separate study looking at the priming effects that video games cause, there was no evidence to support the idea that violent behavior can be learned through this effect. The priming effect is essentially the idea that media or other outside influences can prime the mind to alter the behavior of a person. Basically, these outside influences can open the door to behavioral shifts. However, this is not the case for video games, as the study shows. All of this isn't mentioning the millions of people such as myself who play video games daily and haven't become increasingly violent. It's clear that video games affect kids in the most profound ways, but even then the behavioral shifts aren't as severe as most people would imagine. In my opinion, video games should not be linked to real-world violence. While many people like to point at school shootings such as the Columbine shooting and state that it was video games that caused the incident because the shooters were fans of Doom, that doesn't hold up when you think of the millions of other people that played the exact same game and didn't murder others. Something can be said about violent games such as Grand Theft Auto being in the hands of kids and the effect it can have on them, but I can't say with certainty that it will lead to them being real-life criminals and murderers. In fact, I would say that if someone plays a violent game and then becomes increasingly aggressive, chances are they were going to become more violent anyways. From my perspective, video games are a way to relieve stress and let out aggression in a safe way. I've played countless hours of games such as Grand Theft Auto, Halo, and Call of Duty, and that's because they're an outlet for aggression and frustration, not because I want to kill people in real life. This isn't even mentioning all the great times I've had while playing with friends online and how this has allowed me to remain close to them while living thousands of miles away. Video games are not a gateway to violence. They're a form of media that allows people to connect to others in whatever way they want. They allow us to become whatever we want to be and live out our childhood fantasies. Video games are an important new form of media, not the cause of violence.